In this episode, we continue third-party risk by looking at the constraints and safeguards that shape vendor relationships after the selection process begins. A vendor can look excellent on paper and still create problems if the organization does not understand practical limits such as staffing, resources, geography, jurisdiction, return on investment, and lock-in. These factors affect how much control you really have, how quickly the vendor can respond, what laws may apply, and how difficult it may be to leave the relationship later. We also look at assurance mechanisms, which are the ways an organization gains confidence that a vendor is doing what it promised. Vendor assessments, compliance attestations, penetration testing, and rules of engagement, ROE, all help make vendor risk more visible. The goal is not to distrust every vendor. The goal is to understand the relationship clearly before it becomes a problem. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A vendor constraint is any limitation that affects what the vendor can provide, how the relationship works, or how much risk the customer must accept. Some constraints are obvious, such as cost, service availability, or the number of staff assigned to support the customer. Others are less obvious, such as where data is stored, which subcontractors are used, what laws apply, and how quickly the vendor can make changes. Constraints matter because security expectations must be realistic and enforceable. If a vendor promises round-the-clock support, but only has a small team in one time zone, the customer needs to know how that support will actually work. If the vendor depends on another provider for hosting, the customer needs to understand that dependency. Constraints do not automatically make a vendor bad, but they do define the boundaries of what the vendor can reliably deliver. Staffing constraints can affect security more than people first realize. A vendor may have strong technology but limited people available for support, incident response, engineering, account management, or compliance requests. If the customer has a security incident at night, on a weekend, or during a holiday, the vendor's staffing model may determine whether help is available quickly or delayed until normal business hours. Staffing can also affect patching, vulnerability remediation, monitoring, and customer communication. A small vendor may provide excellent service, but it may depend on a few key people. If those people leave, become overloaded, or are unavailable during a crisis, service quality can drop. A larger vendor may have more coverage, but the customer may receive less personal attention. Third-party risk management asks you to look at whether staffing matches the importance of the service being provided. Resource constraints go beyond people. A vendor may have limited infrastructure, budget, tooling, time, or operational maturity. A service provider might not be able to scale quickly if customer demand grows. A software vendor might not have a mature secure development program. A consulting company might not have enough specialized expertise for a complex environment. A cloud or managed service provider may have strong resources overall, but the specific service tier purchased by the customer may provide limited support. This is where procurement and security need to work together. The lowest cost option may come with fewer safeguards, slower response, weaker reporting, or limited customization. You do not always need the most expensive service, but you need the service level to match the risk. Resource constraints become dangerous when the organization assumes the vendor can do more than the contract, service tier, or operating model actually supports. Geography can create vendor risk because location affects operations, law, access, communication, and resilience. A vendor may store data in another country, use support staff in multiple regions, or rely on facilities in areas exposed to natural disasters, political instability, or regional outages. Geography can also affect time zone coverage. A vendor with staff on the other side of the world may provide useful overnight support, or it may create delays if business hours rarely overlap. Data location is especially important when privacy, government, financial, or health information is involved. Some organizations have rules about where certain data may be stored or processed. If a vendor moves data to a different region without clear approval, the customer may face legal or contractual problems. Geography is not just a map issue. It affects trust, availability, oversight, and compliance. Jurisdiction is about the legal authority that applies to a vendor, a contract, a system, or data. This can become complicated when the customer, vendor, data center, users, and subcontractors are in different places. A company in one country may hire a provider in another country that stores data in a third country. Each location may bring different laws, privacy rules, breach notification duties, access rights, and government authorities. Jurisdiction matters because a customer may assume its local rules apply everywhere, but the vendor may also be subject to laws where it operates. Contract language can define some responsibilities, but it cannot make every legal issue disappear. For exam purposes, remember that jurisdiction affects compliance and risk because location can change which rules apply and which authorities may have power over data, records, disputes, or investigations. Return on investment, ROI, is the value an organization expects to receive compared with the money, time, and effort spent. In vendor management, ROI helps decision-makers ask whether a vendor relationship is worth its cost and risk. A vendor may reduce staffing burden, provide expertise, improve availability, speed up delivery, or add a capability the organization could not easily build itself. Those benefits need to be weighed against subscription costs, integration effort, security review, contract management, training, monitoring, and exit planning. ROI is not only about saving money. A more expensive vendor may deliver better resilience, stronger controls, faster support, or lower operational risk. A cheaper vendor may look attractive until hidden costs appear through outages, weak support, poor security evidence, or difficult integration. Good decisions consider the whole value, not only the initial price. Vendor lock-in happens when it becomes difficult, expensive, or disruptive to leave a vendor. Lock-in can come from proprietary technology, custom integrations, long contracts, special data formats, high migration costs, limited staff knowledge, or business processes that become deeply dependent on the vendor. Lock-in is not always intentional or malicious. Sometimes it grows gradually because the service becomes useful and more teams start depending on it. The risk appears when the organization loses flexibility. If prices rise, service quality drops, the vendor is acquired, or security concerns emerge, leaving may be painful. Exit planning helps reduce this risk. The organization should understand how data can be exported, how long transition would take, what alternatives exist, and what support the vendor provides during termination. Lock-in becomes more serious when the vendor supports critical systems or stores sensitive data. Assurance mechanisms help the customer gain confidence that a vendor's controls, promises, and practices are real. Assurance does not mean blind trust. It means using evidence to reduce uncertainty. A vendor may describe strong security in marketing language, but the customer needs a way to verify whether those claims are meaningful. Assurance can come from security questionnaires, independent audit reports, certifications, compliance attestations, customer assessments, vulnerability summaries, penetration testing results, policy reviews, and ongoing monitoring. The right mechanism depends on the risk of the relationship. A low-risk vendor may not need deep review. A vendor handling sensitive data or supporting critical operations needs stronger assurance. The purpose is to answer practical questions. Does the vendor protect data properly? Does it manage vulnerabilities? Does it monitor access? Does it have a tested response process? Does it meet the obligations in the agreement? Vendor assessments are structured reviews used to evaluate a vendor's security, privacy, operational, and compliance posture. An assessment may happen before selection, before contract signing, during onboarding, periodically during the relationship, or before renewal. It may include questionnaires, interviews, document requests, technical reviews, site visits, or review of independent reports. A good assessment is risk-based. You do not need the same review for a landscaping company as you need for a cloud provider storing customer records. Assessments also need follow-up. If the vendor gives weak answers or identifies gaps, the organization must decide whether to require remediation, add contract terms, accept the risk, choose another vendor, or limit the vendor's access. A vendor assessment is not just a checklist. It is a decision support activity that helps the organization understand whether the relationship is safe enough. Compliance attestations are statements or evidence that a vendor meets certain requirements, standards, or control expectations. An attestation may come from the vendor, an independent assessor, or a formal audit report, depending on the context. The value of an attestation depends on who performed the review, what was reviewed, when it was reviewed, and whether the scope matches the service the customer uses. A report that covers one product may not prove that another product is secure. A certification from several years ago may not reflect current operations. A broad statement that a vendor follows security best practices may not be enough for a high-risk relationship. You should treat attestations as useful evidence, but not as magic. They need to be read carefully. Scope, date, exceptions, and limitations matter because assurance is only helpful when it applies to the actual risk. Penetration testing can be another assurance mechanism when used properly. A penetration test is an authorized security assessment that looks for ways weaknesses could be exploited. In a vendor context, the customer may want to know whether the vendor conducts testing, how often testing occurs, what scope is included, how findings are remediated, and whether summaries can be shared. Sometimes the customer may request permission to test an environment that affects its data or integration. This is sensitive because testing can disrupt systems, expose data, or affect other customers if it is not controlled. That is why testing must be authorized, scoped, and coordinated. A penetration test report can provide useful assurance, but it is only a snapshot in time. The customer should also care about whether the vendor has a process for fixing findings and improving controls afterward. ROI define the boundaries for an authorized security test or assessment. They explain what is allowed, what is not allowed, when testing may occur, which systems are in scope, which techniques are prohibited, who must be contacted, how emergencies are handled, and how findings will be reported. ROI protect both sides. The tester needs clear permission so legitimate testing is not mistaken for an attack. The vendor or customer needs limits so testing does not damage systems, expose unrelated data, or disrupt normal operations. In third-party relationships, ROI become especially important because multiple organizations may be involved. A customer might want to test an integration, but the vendor may host other customers in the same environment. Clear rules prevent misunderstandings and help make the assessment useful instead of risky. The main idea to carry forward is that third-party risk is shaped by both promises and practical limits. Staffing, resources, geography, jurisdiction, ROI, and lock-in all affect whether a vendor relationship is safe, useful, affordable, and manageable over time. Assurance mechanisms help the organization verify that the vendor's controls are more than words. Vendor assessments organize the review. Compliance attestations provide evidence when their scope and date match the risk. Penetration testing can reveal weaknesses when it is authorized and carefully managed. ROI define the boundaries that make testing safe and fair. For Security Plus SY0801. Remember that vendor management is not finished when a vendor is selected. The relationship needs clear constraints, evidence, monitoring, and controlled ways to verify that security expectations are being met.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.